So let's go there with those 6 different kind of components of health. Like what and why is having good like sexual wellness, what is that really doing for our lives? What is it that we're getting from that?
Oh, doing so many things. I tell people that to me, sex is like the ultimate hack. Everyone's talking about like biohacks and what they can do, but sex is actually like we've had it forever, and it's a huge biohack. It does all kinds of things from an emotional and sort of mental standpoint. We know that people who have an active, healthy sex life, which active is usually defined as like having sex 1 to 2 times a week in a
Yep.
healthy relationship kind of thing. Those people tend to have less depression, they have less anxiety, they
Mm.
sleep better, they have better self-esteem, they feel less lonely. We know that people who have sort of an active, healthy sex life tend to have closer relationships with their partner or partners,
Mm.
and that those relationships tend to be longer lasting and happier. And then from a physical standpoint, we know that those people tend to have less cognitive declines. They have better memory. Older people who are having more frequent sex actually have less problems with cognitive failures and declines, which I think
Sure.
is fascinating. There's some hippocampus studies on that are really interesting. We know that sex helps with blood pressure. It helps with reducing cardiovascular disease, heart disease.
Yep.
It potentially keeps your telomeres longer, depending on what research you read. Helps with sleep. I mean, there's basically everything, almost all aspects of health that you can think of. If you
Sure.
have an active, healthy sex life, sex is going to help those areas.
That's a lot that you just unpacked there. Where do we
I just
begin?
spewed a lot of information.
Yes. Let's start with some of the mental health aspect. You mentioned how like somebody that is sexually active with their partner once or twice a week, that it has all the host of different mental health benefits. What is it from like a neuroscientific level that you're seeing there? Like, what is it that allows somebody to have less stress or have better mental clarity? What are some things you're seeing there from like neuroscience?
You get a lot of different shifts in hormones. You get, like for instance, oxytocin is a big one that
Mm-hmm.
you get a big bump in oxytocin, not even from just sex, even just like holding and cuddling and things like that, which is of
Sure.
course is going to make you feel closer to your partner. There's going to be boosts in serotonin, which is going to be kind of, happiness. Dopamine will also, go up and back down again, which is something else that gives you pleasure.
Yep.
We also can see increases in different hormones like testosterone and things like that, which are going to, potentially go on to make you just feel better in general. So
Yeah.
it depends on kind of each moment. There are lots of hormonal changes and things that are happening. And a lot of people will ask me, what if I don't have a partner? Like, just having sex, just masturbating, et cetera. Does that help at all? And it does. Not all the studies have studied that. A lot of them have studied sort of partnered sex,
Mm-hmm.
but even just the act of sort of the self-pleasure, the orgasm, like all of that has benefits as well. So I think it's important to think about sexual health, whether you have someone that you're currently, engaging with or not.
Yeah. That's fascinating. You also mentioned a lot of benefits with physicality, and what's interesting for me is and we mentioned this in the beginning of the conversation, the interconnectedness of all the health elements. But having and focusing on sexual wellness, it leads to those different components that you just mentioned. Does it also do the same in reverse? So like if you focus on your physical exercise, is that going to improve your sexual wellness?
Absolutely. So that's exactly what happens. So basically, sex, positively benefits all these different areas of your health.
Yep.
And all those different areas of health can either positively or negatively benefit your sex life. So,
Yeah.
so we know that people who have depression, they're less likely to have sex. They're more likely to have a low sex drive. They're more likely
Yep.
to have erectile dysfunction or sexual dysfunction. So yeah, they basically go back and forth.
Yeah.
Certainly, there's huge tie-ins between physical activity, exercise, things like that, and good sexual function, especially in men, but also in
Yep.
women. So it is absolutely important to take care of all of those other aspects of health, whether it's physical or mental or social or environmental, spiritual. All of those things will play into how you experience sex.
Sure. You mentioned also the idea of it possibly improving our telomeres. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? I know you said based on some research.
Yeah, there's been a couple of studies. I know of at least one that was, I believe it was in women actually, which is most of them are in men, but that looked at sexually active women and found that they had, you know, older women who had longer telomeres in general than
Mm-hmm.
the ones who are less sexually active. That doesn't mean, it doesn't prove causality. It doesn't say, you know, for sure that sex is the reason that they have long telomeres. It may be an association more than anything, but I think it's, you know, it's interesting to think about, does this do something on a sort of a gene level that, you know, changes expression of proteins that could have longer lasting effects than just, you know, a few minutes or a few hours.
Sure. And can you tell, just for our audience that may know the term telomeres or telomeres, however you pronounce it, they may have heard that, but not necessarily know what it is in terms of, you know, anti-aging benefits?
Yeah, so telomere, if you think about your chromosomes, there are these two little, like, it's like little X-shaped, you know, little chromosomes inside your cells where all the DNA lives.
Mm-hmm.
On the end of them, they have these little caps that are almost like the shoelace caps, the little, you know, the little plastic caps on the end of your shoelaces, and they keep those chromosomes intact.
Mm-hmm.
And but as you get older, each time your cell divides, that little cap becomes shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter. So that cap is those are your telomeres. And so what happens is as you get older, those caps become shorter, and at some point, then if they're too short, then that cell ends up dying.
Mm-hmm.
And so as we get older, that the telomeres shorten, and what we're trying to do is to keep your telomeres from shortening as quickly, or even eventually potentially to lengthen our telomeres through different practices. And most of that's, you know, lifestyle things that we already know about, but it's a fascinating field, and it's one of the causes of aging that are being studied as you know, could be something we could reverse.
Yeah. Super interesting stuff. So from what I'm hearing, it sounds like if you have more sex, you could possibly extend your life, which is pretty
there
great.
actually have been there were some mortality studies in men. Again, it wasn't a prospective study, so it wasn't like they took men and they said you have to have sex this much, and then they studied them over years. But they took men and they just followed them over, I think it was a 10-year period, and the men who had active, healthy sex lives at the end of that 10-year period ended up having about a 50% mortality rate compared to the men who did not have healthy sex lives. And there's, you know, again, there's several other parts of that are being discussed, but that's pretty big.
It's a big number. Yeah, that's a big number. What about immune function, especially in a year like right now where we're going through a global pandemic? A lot of people are worried about their immune system. What can you tell us about immune function and how it relates to sexual wellness?
That's a great question. There was actually a study that I just read about that was in college kids, where they took college kids and they asked them, you know, essentially, how much are you having sex? And the ones who had sex between 1 and 2 times a week, that was kind of the sweet spot, they ended up having higher salivary IgG levels. So essentially, higher levels of the components in their saliva that were able to fight viruses. So they actually had the better ability to fight viruses if they were having sex 1 or 2 times a week, compared to people who were having sex a lot more or a lot less.
Interesting.
It was a small study, but I think that's fascinating that you know that something like that could affect something as, you know, important as immunity.
Yeah, I find that really interesting that that group that was having sex 1 to 2 times a week. I thought you were going to say compared to just people that were not having sex as often, but it's interesting that it beat out, just in this study, people that were having sex more often than 1 to 2 times a week.
Yeah, and
I
wouldn't read too much into that because it's, you know, it's college kids. Like what they could have like 12 partners, or that, you know, like very who knows.
There's a lot of there's a lot of variables there for sure.
There's a lot of variables, but I did note that as well.
Yep. What about? I think you mentioned lower blood pressure in the health of our cardiovascular system. What are you seeing there with the correlation between cardiovascular health and sexual wellness?
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure the mechanism behind why sex seems to improve blood pressure. It's probably related to nitric oxide. Nitric oxide, is the main chemical messenger that tells our blood vessels to vasodilate, which means, open up and let more blood through. And we know nitric oxide is it's important for everything. It's important for keeping your blood pressure low. It's important for, exercise, all these things. And it's really important for for sex, because in order to have sex, you have to have nitric oxide that essentially opens the blood vessels up in the pelvis and lets the blood get in to those areas to, you know, be able to have erections and to be able to have vaginal lubrication and things like that. So nitric oxide is super important. And I think there's definitely relationships between there are definitely relations between nitric oxide and blood pressure. People who don't have as much nitric oxide are going to have higher blood pressure, and they're also going to have more sexual dysfunction. And I'm not exactly sure the sort of causality of those things, but
Sure.
But yeah, nitric oxide is super important and for both of those.
Okay, that's interesting. So the next thing I kind of want to get into here is a little bit more biohacky stuff. So I know you've talked before about shockwave therapy and how that can treat erectile dysfunction.
Yeah.
Another thing I want to talk a little bit about in that same realm is I'm not sure if you have any information on this, but it's something that I've recently become more aware of, is with cold exposure and breathing exercises. I have recently gotten into the Wim Hof Method. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Wim Hof.
Yeah, I know Wim.
So I did a session with one of his instructors a couple months back, and they were talking about how just the overall method can improve our sexual performance. And that's when I was like, huh, that's interesting. I want to look a little bit more into this. And then I saw researching your work that you were talking about shockwave therapy and how it can improve sexual wellness. So what are you seeing there with shockwave therapy? If you have any information on cold therapy and breathing in general, how that can improve our sex lives?
So definitely I have a lot of experience with shockwave therapy. So shockwave therapy is also called low intensity extracorporeal shockwave therapy. That's the long name. In the U.S., the most common treatments are the Gainswave protocol, which you've probably heard of. Those are clinics, doctors who do the treatments in the clinic. And then there are some home devices that are coming out now that I haven't had a chance to use myself, but that are starting to be used as well. But basically, it's using high intensity sound waves that are delivered into the penis and into the deep parts of the penis. And what we know from that is those sound waves cause a little bit of micro trauma. So just a little tiny bit of trauma, enough that your body's like, oh, we got to fix that. And so then your body sends in all these growth factors to the area. It sends in other growth factors that increase blood vessel formation. So you get better blood flow and blood vessel formation.
Yep.
We get stem cell recruitment. You get nitric oxide release. So it's essentially, it's almost like doing, stem cell injections or PRP injections, which I also do. It's a little different, but similar mechanism. You're essentially bringing in blood flow to help repair that tissue. And there's over 40 studies at this point that show that shockwave therapy can be effective for improving erectile dysfunction. I think it's at this point it's 80+% effective, depending on kind of how severe your disease is. But it's game changing, honestly, in for men's sexual health.